Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. There isn't a Friday reads for me this week because I haven't completed any books because I've been madly concentrating on my own work because I set myself the deadline of the end of January to finish it. So instead, quite timely, Sean the Book Maniac has done the next in his series of alphabet soup tags, where he takes a letter of the alphabet and draws up a list of prompts around that letter, and this letter is the letter W. So prompt 1. W is for writer. A writer you've met, know or have seen in real life. Doesn't have to be really famous, but should at least have been published. Well, the one I suppose I've met in a fuller sense is the writer Lee Rourke, whose book Glitch was published last year. That was his third novel. He's also written The Canal, and I can't remember the middle one. And I know Lee because he sort of hosted my book launch of my last book, where it was he and I in conversation about disruptive literature. The most famous author I've seen but not spoken to is when I used to work in the record shop in Brick Lane in London. It was near Jeanette Winterson's shop. She has a shop near there, and I used to see her quite frequently coming and going from her shop. Question 2. W is for war. The last great book you read about war, and or one you want to read, or why you don't read war books. Well, I'm currently doing a buddy read of Tim O'Brien in the Lake of the Woods, which is about a Vietnam vet. And is sort of referring to the My Lai massacre. And Tim O'Brien is a supreme, the best writer on Vietnam in terms of fiction that I've come across. I've read books like Kevin Powers' The Yellow Birds. O'Brien is far superior because he's more literary. He's more inquiring into how we put stories together, because for him, at least in his book, The Things They Carried, it's about how important stories are to maintain memories of those who've been killed in war. And it's a brilliant disquisition into that. I'm not going to talk about this because I am engaged in the middle of a buddy read with Jason, Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and Kelly's books I'm not reading. But this is equally superb. And in non-fiction, this is Freefall, a sniper story from Chechnya by Nikolai Lilin, who was a Russian sniper in the Chechen War. And I've got I talk about this. And I can't remember which other war book. And I'll post a link to that video. It's one I made it's one of my earliest videos. This is a superb book, and really, you know, I was born at slightly the wrong time and in the wrong country in the UK to be sort of so bound up in Vietnam, like obviously a lot of the American public psyche still is to some extent. So Vietnam was never hugely significant for me. This is about the Chechen Wars, which I followed from a distance when they were happening. And you know, this is a totally different order of brutality from, I mean, Vietnam was bad enough, but some of the stuff that is described in here, things like, you know, booby trapping dead bodies, so when they came to be removed from the battlefield, they'd kill the people moving them, stuff like that. This is an amazing book on modern warfare. 3. W is for www.writer.com. A writer you'd recommend or want to read whose first and or last name starts with W. Bonus points for both first and last names. Well, bonus points. Will Wiles, Plume. I like this book so much it crept into the lower echelons of my top 10 reads of last year. It's my first Will Wiles book. He has 2 others out which I will track down. It's not a perfect book in one sense for me because at the heart of it is an alcoholic. And I'm, you know, I don't like reading about addicts anymore. I've kind of grown weary of that. And this book is so good in the rest of what it does, in the themes that it's looking at, which is London and technology and how we put ourselves out there through our digital footprint so that other people could track us, all that sort of stuff. And the changing face of London architecture and London lifestyle. It's brilliant. So it was so good that it overcame a character at the heart, which I didn't like and wasn't interested in. Will Wiles. W is for Wait and See, a book or writer you're not ready to try yet, and why? Well, this is slightly not a tangent, but anyway, the writer is Sally Rooney, and in all honesty, I have no desire to ever try her. But why it fits into this prompt. The title of my current work, which as I say I'm about to finish, is called Solipsistic Conversations with Close Friends, which obviously draws on Sally Rooney's Conversations with Friends. And apart from the fact any publisher I end up going with might not like that title and insist I change it, but let's assume for this that it stays. Now, I can't honestly be said to be, addressing or answering Sally Rooney's book because I haven't read it. But I feel at some point, if my title stays for my work, I'm going to have to read it. So at least I know what I'm talking about. And the reason I have no desire to read Sally Rooney is, in all the sort of criticism and talk about her, it's that she's writing for a generation, her generation, whatever generation it is. And I say that because I absolutely refute these marketing, classifications of boomers, Generation X, millennials. I don't even understand. I couldn't pigeonhole, who's in what, because I reject them so utterly. But it's not just that. I have no interest in authors who are writing books purely about their own generation for their generation. And yes, obviously other people might read out of interest. But to be so, and maybe Rooney hasn't done, maybe it's unfair for Rooney to be criticised for this. As I say, I haven't read it, but that notion of, here is a time in our contemporary lives, and these are the people who populate it, but only a certain specific group. That they all subject to the same thinking, cultural influences. If the recent results of general elections have told us anything, you can't lump people together in groups and sort of say, oh yes, they all voted this way because of that. No, they all had a myriad of diverse reasons. So, this sort of narrowing of perspective to a certain group. Books about the sort of Viennese intellectuals in the 1920s, or the Hemingway and set in Paris. It's fair enough to write about those because you're not representing a whole generation. You're representing a very particular part of it. And of its artistic and cultural life. You're not trying to encapsulate the whole era of the Jazz Age, or whatever. Whereas, again, it's maybe unfair, but it seems to me that, Rooney's book has been taken as this speaks for a generation. No, it speaks for a certain, whatever. But I will have to read it. 5. W is for What's the Title? A book with at least 2 W's in the title, bonus points for more than 2. Well, I've got several books that have 2, but I was disappointed because in the other letter versions of this tag, I've always been able to find books with loads of letters in the title, loads of the letter under scrutiny. But I failed with this. I didn't beat 2. So, Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami, which is my favourite one of his books. Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, so there's 2 there. Tibor Fischer, How to Rule the World, so How and World, so there's 2 there. This was published at the beginning of last year. I hated it. Ivan Klima, a writer I used to read an awful lot of, Czech writer. Most of his books were before the Velvet Revolution, so still under the iron grip of communism. This was one of the first of his that came after the fall of, and sort of the introduction of democracy and freedom, and the struggle, the compromise, having sort of the main character has this sort of movie that he always wanted to make while under the hand of communism. He couldn't make it. Now he has the freedom, but it's not quite so easy. So it's a good book, and it's called Waiting for the Dark, Waiting for the Light. So obviously 2 waitings. Stories in the Worst Way by Gary Lutz. So worst and way. Gary Lutz is an extraordinary writer of extraordinary sentences. He only writes short stories. I really recommend, reading them. It will blow your minds. As a sentence veers seemingly from nowhere out of the previous sentence, that kind of stuff. And finally, for the purposes of this, What is the What by Dave Eggers. And I haven't read this, and I was just reading the blurb, and it's another book about Sudan. Yes, so obviously Eggers, I assume, must have spent time in Sudan. I'm not going to read this anytime soon. It's also a bit of a chunker. 6 W's for Women, a great book you've read recently by a female lost children. Lost Children Archive, Valeria Luiselli, my book of the year last year. I need to say nothing more. I will post the link to my effusive review. 7 W is for Word, one you encountered recently in your reading that was new to you, and or your favourite word. Well, a word I encountered, I'm not sure where I encountered it, but anyway, sequela, Sequela, an abnormal condition resulting from a previous disease, or rather like that. And I do kind of like medical terms, because my favourite word is deterge, which is obviously at the root of detergent, and people would associate it as to meaning to clean, to wipe, which it does, but it has a more specific medical meaning, which is a cleanse of impurities or undesirable matter as a wound. And I use that in one of my short stories about a wound, which in itself was inspired by Kafka's short story A Country Doctor. So sure, the Book Maniac also does relatively frequent videos on derivation of words, and I replied to one of his videos saying there are 2 types of new words to me. Ones that I can use in my own writing, and ones that I can't. So I've definitely used deterge. As yet, I haven't used sequela, sequela, but I could foresee circumstance in which I do use that. 8 W is for weary, a theme, plot twist, and or cliche you're getting damn tired of. Okay, well, I've got I suppose a genre of novels I would talk about, but there's also a specific trope which I think it's going to surprise people that this even exists. 2 years ago I read 3 books of this trope, and last year I read another book, and that trope is humans having sex with dogs. I read it in Curtis White's otherwise exemplary book Requiem, Alex Phoebe's Lucia, which is, of course, his prize-winning book of the Republic of Consciousness. I also read it in Jonathan Mead's short story collection called Filthy English. And last year it was also in Michel Houellebecq's Serotonin. And I don't get it. Apart from questions of taste, there are questions of morals, because obviously animals can't give consent, so it is, apart from the fact it's probably illegal in law under sort of bestiality laws, it is offensive. But even in literary terms, I don't get it. What is that a metaphor? What is that supposed to represent? I don't know. And as for the genre, well, it's what I call stoner novels. Now, they don't necessarily have to be about stoners, although Michael Chabon's The Wonder Boys is exactly about stoners. But it's this style of writing, literary fiction, where characters sort of drift through aimlessly, purposely, from one event to another, as if they're stoned, as if they are not in control of events. Events happen to them, and they don't even particularly react to it. And it's not even a sort of plot. It's not like, oh, it's important this happens prior because then that happens. It's just a meandering for the sake of meandering, and I'm bored. Stop it. W is for whippersnapper, a writer who writes or wrote shockingly well at such a young age. I don't know, because I don't really, I never bother reading up about writers. So I don't know who wrote what. I have it in my head that Kafka wrote books when he was quite young, but I could be completely. I mean, he died quite young, so I have no answer to that. And scrolling down, I think to the last question. 10. W is the weakest link. A book in a series or in a favourite author's oeuvre that wasn't nearly as good as all the others. Well, back to two writers I've actually already mentioned. One is Dave Eggers, who actually produced two works of fiction last year. One was called The Parade, which I really enjoyed. I think that came out in about March. And then just at the end of the year, we had this, The Captain and the Glory, which is basically a spoof about Trump. But it's not a very intelligent one. It's a bit sort of hammer to crack a walnut. And quite honestly, if this is the best that the literary opposition to Trump can come up with, then we're doomed to 4 more years of Trump, because this misses the target by a country mile. The other is Houellebecq's, as I say, I mentioned his book Serotonin last year. I love Houellebecq. He's never had a duff book, and this isn't a duff book, Serotonin, but it is the weakest by far. Again, it's not quite a meandering book, but there's nothing really to pull the events together. A lot of very recognisable Houellebecq themes, and there are little flourish sort of sections of the book which are just, prime Houellebecq writing. But I couldn't see there's any core to the book at all. It just lacked something to put it all together. And finally, W is for whosoever, tag wantonly. Well, Sean's tagged 1 million people. He also has established the principle, which is why I'm doing this tag. If anyone who he's tagged previously for Alphabet Soup and done it are continuously tagged in all future ones. So I have tagged on previous videos other people, whether they've done the tag or not. So they are still charged to do this. So thanks to Sean, and till next time. Sorry, addendum. Going back to question 10, W is for weakest link, a book in a series or in a favourite author's oeuvre that wasn't nearly as good as all the others. How could I forget Jeffrey Eugenides? I love Eugenides. He only writes a novel about every 10 years. I don't know how he affords to do that, but anyway, we are the better for it, because he is the supreme craftsman of the novel. So from Virgin Suicides to Middlesex, even The Marriage Plot, his last novel, which a lot of people didn't like, I liked it. But this is a book of short stories called Fresh Complaint. And it backs up Shaw the Bookmaniac's theory that you're either a good novelist and a bad short story writer, or a good short story writer and a bad novelist. Eugenides is clearly a divine, scrumptious novelist and hopeless at short stories. And one can't even sort of say that this represents a particular sort of time in his writing, because all these short stories are gathered from across his entire 30-year span of writing. So it's not even a sort of a time in his career thing. These are just bad.